I wanted to be every woman so that he would never want to have sex with another woman or have this open relationship. So in terms of my sexuality, it meant that instead of being able to be in a relationship where I was really authentic and connected to my own pleasure, my own orgasm, my own sexuality, just like generally, I fell into this very performative mode, but like on steroids.
Hello and welcome to the Evolving with Jessica podcast. My name is Jessica. I am an integrative nutrition health coach, a holistic skin healing guide, and certified life coach. In this podcast, we cover topics such as holistic health and wellness, nutrition, and spirituality. If you enjoy or gain any insight, please leave a review. This makes the show more searchable, which helps others find the information too. Today, I am interviewing Alaska Wolfe. Alaska is the creator of the Sensualist, where powerful, multidimensional women are initiated into the world of sacred sexuality as a path of remembrance of their most authentic self-expression and truth. As the Sensual Expansion Coach, Alaska believes in the power of sensuality and eroticism to create profound healing, liberation, evolution, and expansion. A space in which all women can reconnect to vibrant aliveness, deepest worth, radical self-love, and harness their erotic power to create fulfilling, intimate, and pleasure-drenched lives. Alaska vulnerably shares a lot about her personal story and experiences with how she used to view sex and how that impacted her both in relationship and her perspective of herself. We start out by talking about how someone can get clear on the life and the vision that they want to manifest and move into discussing the healing aspect that is intertwined. There's a lot to be learned from Alaska, and if you want to hear more from her, check out her Instagram and TikTok at Alaska Wolfe _. And be sure to follow me as well at Evolving with Jessica. I love you. I thank you for listening, and please enjoy this episode. So you have a recent post that says that sometimes not knowing what you want becomes a way to accept less than what you need.
Yeah.
So in my past, I won't claim it to be true now, but in my past, I was a very indecisive person.
Yeah.
And I had that belief for so long. And only recently, I realized that it doesn't have to be true. Like that, that belief does not serve me any longer and that I can change it. Totally. So I would love to hear, or I would love to talk about the importance of getting clear on what you want and like how indecisive people can start to do that for themselves.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't even think that this is something that's necessarily contained to people that are indecisive, right? Because I think it's a little bit of a mechanism that happens almost on the subconscious, where you are not wanting to be too clear about what you want exactly, because it'll mean so many things. Like you will have to start saying no to things that are not what you want. You will actually have to be able to like move into the world with this clarity of knowing exactly what you want and needing to go after it. And so when things get hard, you can't just fall back and be like, it was vague. I didn't really want it. I didn't really know what it was. And so it actually puts a little bit of pressure on you in some ways, knowing what you want, because there is this kind of impetus, like you have to go out into the world and try and get what you want if you know what it is. And I think something that happens a lot for people, maybe specifically around dating and relating and relationships, where they feel that really tender and vulnerable kind of space, is that they don't get clear about exactly what it is that they want. So they don't say, like, I want my partner to be loyal and caring, and I want to work together, and I want to do all of these amazing things. Because then when they meet the guy that's like activating their nervous system, and he is attractive and it's something that they, you know, they're attracted to him. And so they're like, oh, well, maybe I can round him up to the perfect guy if I don't really know what it is that I want. And it allows you to stay in scenarios that maybe are not so healthy for you, are not so helpful for you, are even destructive to you. And I know that was really something that I did for a long time. Like I had a desire for a relationship and I had a desire for certain elements of the relationship to be like, you know, monogamous and safe and creative and loving. And I wanted to work together. I wanted all these things. But when I started to get some of my needs met by somebody that was not really the best fit for me, that became so attractive to me because I was finally like a famished beggar getting some of my needs met. And so all of the things that I actually wanted, but hadn't really clarified, I was willing to give up because they also weren't so clear for me, you know? And so when I started getting very clear about what I wanted, I could no longer do that because it just wasn't possible for me to like pretend that I didn't know what I wanted, you know?
Yes, definitely. I can relate to this so much
Yes.
because as throughout the years, I've compiled like lists of things that I want, and they get longer and longer because I
Yeah.
get more like pinpointed. And there comes a point though where it's like you start to doubt, like, am I asking for too much? Is this
Sure.
too clear?
Yeah.
Like, does this exist?
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
then something else comes along and you're like, well, 75 of the 80 boxes are checked.
Sure. But
So
the thing is that when you don't even have the clarity of what the boxes are, you wouldn't even know that maybe only like 5 of the boxes were being ticked, right? Because you're like, well, he's really attractive and he shows up and he calls me once in a while. And you wouldn't actually notice that so many of your other boxes, and often the really important boxes, are not actually being ticked because you don't have that clarity. And so for me, you know, just over the last few years, doing the healing work, doing all the like work that I've done around all of the aspects of healing, it's really shown me that like, if I'm not crystal clear on my vision for the future, if I don't truly know what that is, if I don't know what I'm working towards, if I don't know why I'm working towards it, then it won't materialize, you know? And I think that's another way that women specifically kind of undercut themselves in their lives, in their work, in their relationships, is by not really admitting the fullness of what they want, you know? So it's, they are willing to admit that they want a career that is, you know, maybe they want to be a dancer or something, right? And so they're willing to admit that because that's already a little crazy to admit to the world, maybe like, oh, wow, a dancer, that's not a normal 9 to 5. And so they will admit that, but they won't admit that they actually want to be like a prima ballerina, because that would be outrageous. Like, how could they possibly be so bold to admit that? How could they be so kind of, you know, full of themselves to believe that they had that ability to do that? And I think that's one of the places where women in particular have this conditioning to be like, don't be the tall poppy, don't be up too much in the air, don't let people see you too much, don't take up too much space. And it's really to our detriment, because we do get to this place where we're like, you know, we don't really know the fullness of what we want. And then when we don't get it, you know, after 3 years or 5 years or whatever amount of time it is, we're like, oh, I actually never was very clear about my goal there. Like, I didn't admit that I wanted to, you know, be a dancer and also have sustainable wealth. I didn't admit that I wanted this huge dream, not just this like more acceptable dream, you know? And I think that's one of the places where women, we just have this conditioning that we should be smaller than we truly are, you know? And so it's one of those things.
I'm so happy that we're having this conversation because it's reminding me of like all the different women that I've talked to. When I ask them, because I work with women who are struggling with their skin.
Yeah.
And so I want to know, what is their vision? Like, what do they want for themselves on the other side of healing? And a lot of them don't know. And I feel like a lot of people, a lot of women, a lot of people in general are never asked like what their vision is, like what do you want your life
Totally.
to look like. So it's like if no one ever asks you, it's not usually a question like in our bodies, in our cells, like we're not programmed to ask ourselves this. Like
Totally.
I think it's just now becoming more mainstream and more brought to light that we
Mm.
can create the reality. Like we can, whatever we envision, we can create that. And so it's just like that's why I'm so happy we're having this conversation, because
Yeah.
if you're listening and you have not thought about what you want your life to look like or what you envision for yourself, like you can do that. And it's the clearer you get, the better off.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's one of those things, like whenever I'm speaking with a new client, that is one of the first questions that I'll ask them, right? Because it's like, what do you want your life to look like? Because a lot of people will come to a situation where they're thinking about getting help, getting coaching, getting therapy, whatever it is. And they will be like, I don't want pain. I don't want to be in this relationship with this shitty person anymore. I don't want to feel so stuck because of all my conditioning. I don't want to feel all of these things, but they have no alternative vision. And so I often think like there are only two ways that you are motivated to take action to change things. And that's because the pain is so great, and that's the push factor, or your vision is so irresistible that you have no choice but to go after that because it is so beautiful. It's so clear. You have so much connection to it. And I actually was just saying this to somebody on TikTok yesterday because they were like, that's fine to have a vision, but I have no motivation. And I was like, I actually think you don't have a vision then, because if you had a vision that was drawing you forward, or their pain was not yet great enough to make them move, because it's one of those two push-pull factors that will actually facilitate somebody getting to the point where they're like, I am not doing this anymore. I am going to change, because if I go my whole life feeling this pain or not living in this vision, I know I will feel upset about that. I know I will regret that life.
Yeah,
Oh,
the pain definitely has to get great enough. A lot of people
totally,
know what they need to do, but
totally,
it's just like they're not willing to do it yet. It's like, all right, you're not miserable enough. Like you're not
totally.
earning enough. But
And that's the
eventually,
thing. You have to actually be in a certain degree of pain to actually want to move from where you are. Because if you have any level of comfort, it's not going to be something that will move you from where you are. And that's like, people say, oh, people are always wanting to avoid pain. And I think, I mean, I did that for many, many years. I had a degree of comfort in my relationship. I was getting some of my needs met. And so I just stayed away from change. I kind of knew that I needed to get out of that situation, but the pain had not become great enough. The pot was not boiling water enough,
mm,
if you will.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I was the same way. Again, with my skin, that's why I got into this industry,
Totally.
is because I started getting the skin issues. I made like one or two changes and I
Yeah.
continued on with my life. And then I hit like this major, wall. And
Mm.
I was like, all right, it's time to go inward. It's time to actually really heal. So yeah, I want to go back to something else you said, talking about visions and people getting clear on their vision.
Mm.
You said a lot of people, they will say, well, I don't want this. Like this is a no, this is a no.
Sure.
I feel like that's a great place to start. And
Sure.
if you don't know what your vision is, I mean, I was there. So if that's where you are, I think getting clear on what you don't want is kind of like a stepping stone to figuring out what you do want. Like as
For
far as
sure.
whether it's your partner, like qualities that you don't want in a partner, qualities or things that you don't want in a job or home, even just anything. And
For
then you
sure.
kind of cross those off the list.
Yeah, but the issue comes when people are unwilling to look at the flip side, or maybe not even unwilling, but unable. Like they get so focused on what they don't want that it becomes magnified almost. So if you're saying, And something also that if you're doing it in journaling, right? So if you are like, I do not want to be bothered by these people anymore. I do not want a landlord that is mean to me, like all of these things. The brain actually can't understand the word not. So a lot of people, when they're journaling it out, they're like, I want a landlord that kicks my ass every day. I want a relationship where the guy is treating me badly. Like, and so it's one of those things where if you get so caught up in what you don't want and you start focusing on it and bringing it into like your journaling or your meditations and stuff, instead of actually looking forward at what you desire to call in, what you want to call in your life, because I think that is one of the most potent places to start. And like in my coaching, we're always starting with the desire, because the desire is the thing that kind of grips you into the future and allows you to move forward always with this vision in mind, rather than being like, well, I'm trying to run away from these gremlins behind me. And so I'm constantly looking over my shoulder at the gremlins. And then so the gremlins are always there. And I'm never actually looking forward into the future to find those places of beauty, of inspiration, of like sacred kind of connection to something that I want to create. And so those are the spaces where you can actually hook into the future and be like, I'm going to create this and move towards this and focus on this. And that allows you to stop being so focused on what you're trying to leave behind.
Yes, yes. And that part clicks. I didn't think about the part where our brains, whatever we focus on, that's what we're going to get, whether it's good or bad. The universe doesn't care. It's just, it is.
Totally. And it was one of those things because I noticed in my journaling pages, so I do morning pages every morning, 3 pages of free writing, and you're just kind of dumping your brain, you're getting things out. But often I will kind of think about what I'm trying to call in my life or what I'm creating in my life. And I noticed for a very long time, and still sometimes I'll notice that I'll be saying like, I don't want this, or I do not want this. And it's like, I know that the word not does not get picked up by my brain. So I will actively go back and scratch it out and be like, I need to focus. I need to actually reword this, reorientate this so that I am focused on the future in a positive, even just like positively written in the like pro kind of sense, so that you can actually focus on what you want to create rather than what you're trying to leave behind.
Okay, so that's a really great practice. For the people listening that aren't clear on their vision, what can they do today to get clear?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think a lot of creating your vision is about really stepping into the mindset of where you want to go in the future, right? So if you are somebody that is really struggling with your current situation, and maybe it's like getting clear around what in your current situation is really pulling you down, like really making you feel not alive in your body or not sexy or whatever your specific kind of ailment is, and really starting to ask yourself the questions of like, what would be different in my life if I had this desire? What would it look like in a 5 senses reality, which is another thing I do with clients all the time, which is like really thinking about, in my desired reality, what does it look like? What does it taste like? What can I hear? What are people saying around me? What can I touch? What do I feel underneath my skin? What do I see and hear? Like, and it's getting so clear about the vision of like 5 senses reality. How can I know that I have stepped into that reality and not just thinking like, well, my shitty ex-boyfriend won't be there. It's like really thinking like, my lover will be there. He will be so loyal. He'll be whispering sweet nothings in my ear. We will be in a room together, you know, we're working together, we're up late at night and we're talking about the future, and we have a dog, and you know, I can feel his hand underneath my hand and feel the warmth of that. And getting into that space in your mind where you are actually bringing in that vision and kind of imprinting it on your nervous system when you're in this space of like visioning, because like your brain does not know the vision of the future is just a vision, because, you know, seeing it in reality is the same as seeing it in a vision. So as you get more comfortable with the vision, it becomes more normalized to your system. And so, you know, when you're in a toxic relationship or you're in a place where maybe your skin is horrible, it's really challenging to imagine any other future. And so it can be really challenging to think like, I'm ever going to get there. But as you continue to connect with that vision on a daily basis and kind of really start creating it, making it bigger and bigger and bigger, so too does your body and your nervous system and your mind and your brain and all of it get really comfortable with that becoming a possibility. And I feel like you're always just moving a little bit more towards that until you start to actually look behind you and you're like, actually, that reality feels further than that one, right? And I think that's not always where we start. Like, I think often we start in this place where we're like, well, that's so close. It's so immediate. Like there's always this stuff happening with my boyfriend or my skin. And so we think, oh, it's going to be so far away to get to this place in the future. But as you become more comfortable over time, right, then you can start like really leaning into that reality and it can become so much more vivid. And then it becomes so much more possible. And I think that's actually the trick, like allowing yourself to go there and not stopping yourself from really admitting, claiming everything that you actually desire, because I think that's something that a lot of us do, right? We're like, I don't want too much. I don't want to be rich. I don't want to be, like this beautiful, luscious, sensual, sexy being. Like that would be way too much. And, we can bring in a lot of judgment and we can bring in a lot of shame and criticism around those parts of us that want these things.
Right.
And I think it's also really noticing where you fall into criticism or shame or judgment of your own desires, because your desires are going to lead you exactly where you want to go if you'll let them. But if you won't even allow them in the door, you're going to have a pretty hard time leading you anywhere.
Yes. Okay. So many things, so many good things in there. The feeling needs to come first. And it is so amazing how our bodies, like you said, they don't know the difference between what we're imagining and what is real life.
Totally.
And so we can't, like, our bodies basically, like, if we envision it, if we spend enough time there and we really feel it and sense it with all of our senses, like you're saying, there becomes a point where there's no separation, because our body and reality, the universe, they have to meet. They have to catch up to each other.
Totally.
And so if you get in that space, there is no stopping you, except, like you're saying, limiting beliefs. So if you don't have the self-worth, or if you have, self-doubt, or if you grew up learning that rich people, that they're bad people, that they're greedy, there's not enough money for everybody, like that's going to be, instilled in you, that you need to kind of let go of that and overcome that in order, if you do want to be wealthy and have this type of lifestyle, then you need to be able to overcome those limiting beliefs that were planted when you were, young, because that will stop you from creating that vision. But that's just a step. Right?
Totally. And I think a lot of people don't really actually understand that the things that they want, they are often very afraid of because of the things they were taught when they were children. And because so much of the things that we learned when we were young, they're stored so deep in our bodies, like in our subconscious minds, that we are not even aware of them. And I had somebody ask about this the other day, because I was talking about fake it till you make it, right? So with confidence, you can kind of do fake it till you make it, because you can just imagine the future and imagine yourself doing it, and you can show up and really hold that vision. But with self-worth, you can't really fake it till you make it, because even if you go ahead saying all the affirmations, being like, I'm so worthy, I walk into a room and people are magnetized to me, there are those beliefs that are stored in your subconscious where they are saying like, no, you're not, like, no, you're not, like, and they are always there until you're willing to actually do the work of saying like, okay, if I am actually creating a life where what's being shown to me is scenarios in which I am not holding my worth, and that is quite obvious. Now, for me, it was a toxic relationship where there was abuse and there was, a lack of safety. And so when I got out of that relationship, what I had to ask myself was, what was keeping me in that relationship? Truly, like, if you had a relationship with somebody that was truly unsafe, where you knew you didn't have shared values and you knew all of these like incompatibilities, what were you doing there for 3 years? Why were you chasing that relationship so hard? And why was that something that you couldn't let go of? And I had to understand, hello, son, I had to understand that it was because I felt deeply unworthy. And I never would have known that actually, because I moved through my life in this way that was very powerful in many ways. Like I was an interior designer, a fashion designer, a DJ. Like I moved through my life in this way that kind of showed the world that I was very confident. And because I believed that my worth was being reflected to me, like I was worthy because people were choosing me, and I was worthy because I was playing cool shows, and I was like getting booked around the world. And so I understood my worth to be something that the world reflected to me. And so I was worthy when I was chosen. And so that was the belief that was really keeping me in that relationship and in those lines of work. And it was really actually quite shocking for me when I found out that I felt worthless. It was very shocking. Like I did not know that at all until I came face to face with the fact that I had been choosing this relationship that was actually destroying me. And I had nowhere to run. Like I had to start looking at that, because I knew when that relationship ended that I was never going back to that place again. It was just never going to happen again.
You did something so important there that I want to point out and put a magnifying glass on for everyone listening. You questioned it.
Oh,
You
yes.
asked,
Well,
why
the
did
rock bottom.
it's so important for us to do, no matter if we are in pain, even if it's something that's not painful, like something that we're just on autopilot, like why did I just lock that door? Or why did I check to see that that door was locked after I already locked? Or just, simple things, just questioning our own actions and our own beliefs. Like, why do I think that she said this in this way instead of,
Right.
just getting in the habit of questioning that? Because I heard somebody say this, and I'm not sure if I'm going to get this quote exact, but it's basically like the beliefs that we need to question the most are the ones that we don't question.
Sure. Mm.
So the ones that we don't even think about, and they're harder for us to see, are the ones that we need to look at most, because they're the most deeply ingrained, and that's
Yep.
what's controlling our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so many of them, right? Like we're on autopilot like 95% of the time. We have no idea how much of the time we spend on autopilot. And so what's interesting though, is that I think when you start making small changes in your life, and it can be anything, it can be literally like you get up 10 minutes earlier, you start morning pages, you go for a swim every day, whatever it is. When you start making those little changes to your routine, you can start noticing where all those routines are, right? Because you're like, okay, I want to make some changes in my life. What are they going to be? And even starting with the smallest thing allows you to like take an inventory almost of all of the ways you're choosing to move through your life in this very unconscious way, and finally be able to put some attention on them so that you can say like, okay, I'm going to actively change that. I'm going to make a change here. I'm going to eat better. I'm going to, kind of choose better relationships. I'm going to walk away from this relationship. I'm going to walk away from this friendship. I'm going to walk away from this city. And those compound into creating the life that you actually want. But until you're willing to do the small choices of like questioning even the smallest things that are happening in your life, you're really not going to question anything, because it's not part of your habit,
Mhm.
Mm.
You spoke about your ex that you were with for a couple years, several years. And I want to know, this is going to be a big pivot. You talk a lot about sexual healing.
Yeah.
So when you're in a relationship that didn't serve you, and then you want to move to another one that has, like we were talking about in the beginning, all of the boxes checked.
Yeah.
Where does that play in the sexual healing? Do you need to heal from that previous relationship? Can you do that with the new one?
Yeah. So what's so interesting is that sexuality, I had almost no connection to my sexuality, really at all, kind of throughout my life. I didn't have a connection to my sexuality, and I actually never had any thought that I would become any kind of sex coach, relationship coach. And then I noticed something in my last relationship. Like, so the last relationship that I had was in many ways a beautiful relationship that devolved into something very dangerous. And one of our biggest struggles was that he wanted an open relationship and I did not. And so that became one of the points of contention in our relationship. And the underpinning of that was that neither of us could truly be ourselves. So he was hiding some of who he was in order to be with me, and I was hiding my true needs and desires in order to be with him. And so when I actually was in that relationship, because I felt all of this pressure to, be all women, basically, is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be every woman so that he would never want to have sex with another woman or have this open relationship. So in terms of my sexuality, it meant that instead of being able to be in a relationship where I was really authentic and connected to my own pleasure, my own orgasm, my own sexuality, just like generally, I fell into this very performative mode, but like on steroids, because I feel like in almost all of my relationships, I always had this knowing or this conditioning that sex was for the man. And I was there to basically facilitate his desires. And that was my connection to sexuality. And so when I was going through that relationship, the last one, it was so amplified because I was in this relationship where I felt so unsafe. And all of that was kind of stuck in the middle of the sexuality question for us, right? And so when I got out of that relationship, something was really telling me that the sexuality part was important, right? Because it was also something that was so poignant in our relationship. Like if we could just figure out this one thing, then we could both be happy and be together and whatever it was. And so when we got out of that relationship, I just felt this call towards healing my sexuality. So really putting focus on it, kind of getting back in contact with my sensations and my orgasm, my pleasure, because for a long time, I could have an orgasm by myself, but not with a partner ever. And so every time I went into sex, of course, yes, for sure. And also performing, because I also wanted him to feel good. So I would never, there was so much inauthenticity there. So essentially what it was inside of my sexuality, all of my coping mechanisms, all of the things that I would do in my life, all my limiting beliefs, all of my demons would play out like times 100. So it was so like just dangerous in there, because it was like people pleasing, codependency, it was like performance, it was not being able to know myself or trust myself. I was abandoning myself all of the time. And so I recognized through the help of Layla Martin, who became my mentor, that if I could actually go into my sexuality and begin to heal these patterns, then that ripple effect would move through my entire life. And that's actually the truth of what happened. And I had no idea that this was going to be the journey that I would go on, because never in my life did I stop and think like, isn't it weird that you actually are having sex for, the last 15, 20 years, and you can never be real with your partner. You are not authentic at all. You don't know what you need. You don't know what you want. You don't feel comfortable. You are really abandoning yourself. And so it became this journey of going back to myself to actually start off with those so small, so core elements of like, what do I need? What do I want? Am I safe here? Can I create a container in which I can actually restore all of those elements so that I can move through the world in this more authentic way? And yeah, I really had no idea that that was the path of healing that I was going to go on. And actually, my sister kind of reflected to me. She was like, that's so interesting that you went there, because in my family, my mom had a history of sexual abuse. So she was abused when she was a teenager. And so when she was at age 62, 63, she actually started going to therapy for the sexual trauma that she experienced when she was a teenager. And when she died a few years later, she was in that process. So she was actively trying to heal her sexual trauma. And so there was this very beautiful element of kind of healing of the lineage of trauma in my family, in my whole lineage. And all of that got to come into me, where I was finally ready to be the one that was like, I am actually ready to hold this. I am capable of holding this, and I'm willing to do that work of changing this truth that exists in my family. And my sister was like, that is crazy that you did that, because I want no, it's the forest fire. And I was like, that's just where I knew the healing was. I just had this sense that was where it was going to be. And it was really, really pivotal. And it was really, really a massive shift. And because that shift was so great for me, I have actually made it my work, right? Whereas when I started doing this healing and started doing this course with Layla Martin, I was like, I'm going to be a relationship coach. It's acceptable. People will like it. It's like, it's totally fine. And then when I finished that course, which was predominantly healing for the first 6 months, and then another year of learning to become a coach in the sexuality field, I was like, I'm not going to be a relationship coach, because that was not where my greatest healing was. Like, all of the demons that I needed to meet, all of the underworld that I needed to go into, it was all based around my sexuality. And it just became so pivotal for me. And I walked out the end of that course being like, great, I'm a sex coach now. Like, what? Because I had no intention of that, right? But I think that was also a part of the conditioning. It was also a part of the shame and the feeling that like my sexuality was not okay. My sexuality was for men. My sexuality was not something that I should share with the world. And so it was just so interesting to start peeling back those layers and notice, oh, damn, so many of the ways that you walk through the world is related to how you were conditioned by this society. It's truly astounding when you start to go looking at it. And it has been one of the greatest pleasures of my life to actually do this work, because it's so transformational and it's so, so, so beautiful, because it is this deepest, most intimate part of you, right? Where you're like, you know, if I can't hold myself, if I can't create safety for myself, if I can't stay with myself in my most intimate moments, what chance do I have out there in the world? What chance? Truly.
So when it comes to the sexual healing, you're healing these parts of you that you otherwise would need to heal in a different way. So
Sure.
it's kind of like a domino effect. Like, you can either like speed up the process, or it's a loophole, or it's a way that you can heal these parts all at once.
Yeah. So the thing about sexuality healing is, what it's so beautiful at is that you're going into the somatic reality, right? You're going into the body all of the time, and you're connecting with safety and divinity and ritual, and you're going in and creating safety in the body, and then actually touching the parts of the body that you need to release things from. So you might go in and you might do a pleasure practice of de-armoring, where you're going in and releasing the pressure points where you might store trauma in your body. And then you can actually let that out. You get to re-imprint on your nervous system safety, and being able to connect to moments where you were hurt, moments where you experienced trauma, and you can connect to this part where you can bring in safety and bring in compassion, and you can actually start to release them through the body, which I think is the really powerful stuff, right? Because for me, when I was going to talk therapy, it was really challenging, because I'm a really smart girl, and I could think about all of the reasons why this happened, and I could connect the dots, and I could do all of the parts where I could cognitively understand, but I couldn't do the part where I actually felt the pain of what had happened in the past, or felt the weight of the pain of all of the generations of women who had been told that they were less than and not as good as, and their sexuality was shameful and bad. And so for me, when I started going into my body and being able to like resensitize my body and connect to the parts that had felt hurt and felt pain, then I was able to start actually experiencing those things and starting to like really be able to move them through me, rather than just thinking about them on a loop and being like, I get it. I get it, but I just can't release it, because just knowing why you do something or kind of like what you went through, it's not necessarily enough to actually let go of your hooks that are stuck into those realities, right? And so for me, working with pleasure, working with self-pleasure, working with your body, and working with releasing the things that actually exist inside you are so, so, so powerful. And it's always, of course, done in combination. So in our one-to-one sessions, we're doing a lot of like parts work. So you're working with your inner child or your shadow parts. And those one-to-one sessions are really powerful because you're doing the work of being with another person in those things that you were told, don't ever tell anybody about this. Don't ever show anybody this. Don't ever talk about this with another person. You will be rejected. You will not be loved. You will not belong. If anybody knows these parts of you, you will be shunned. And I think what's so powerful is sitting in front of another person and them saying, you can have all of those elements. You can have those experiences. You can have all of those parts of you, and you can still be loved. You can still connect. You can still belong to the world, to femininity. You can still belong as a woman in the world. And that is like such an amazing kind of switch, right? Because I think for me, I was really trying to force it. Like I actually, I hired a male therapist because I was like, I want to feel safe with men. After my toxic relationship, I want to feel safe with men. I'm going to sit in front of a nice man therapist and he will fix this by being a nice man. And it didn't work. I'll tell you, it didn't work because I didn't know how to feel safe in my body. I didn't know how to recalibrate that sense of like, do I know what a safe man is? Do I have any clue? Will I leave if somebody is not safe? Like, do I know how to draw a boundary? And none of those things became true until I actually learned how to go back into my body and understand when I was safe and create safety for myself. And it's some of the most transformational work. And it's so interesting because I had never heard of it before. I had never known that it was an option, right? And
Yeah.
it's just
I'm not very familiar with it myself, but it all
yeah,
makes sense.
totally.
It has me actually thinking too, it's because I mean, sex is in the highest frequency, and orgasm is the highest, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So it all makes sense because when you're in those higher frequencies, with lower frequency feelings and physical manifestations can't live there.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, but
It's
and
like,
also go
yeah.
ahead.
You get to do both things, right? Because you also, like in your sexual experience, you can often have these remnants of like in the past where you were told it's bad and shameful and hide it and don't ever want anything for you, don't need anything, you won't get love unless you give sex. Like all of these things can exist there. And you also get to bring in that part of you that's like, I accept all of this. I accept that I was taught those things. I accept that you feel the remnants of those and you get to work with them and you get to allow them to be there and you get to cycle out the energy through. And as you say, orgasm is one of the most powerful energies that you can do. So one of the practices that we do inside my container is a sex magic practice where you're actually cycling the energy and you're moving it up through your body. And when you get to your orgasm point to the top of it, you will actually go into your five senses reality of your vision and connect with it in that energy, because that's where it's super powerful. And even if all you did was to reorientate yourself pleasure practice to involve you falling deeper in love with yourself, you being able to like accept your body more and really think about the vision that you're calling in for the future. If that was the only thing you did, you would still be creating massive shift in your life, right? Because you're already creating this powerful energy and you're just reorientating it to like creating a life that's more and more for you, that's more real for you, that's more authentic to you. And I think it's so beautiful.
You literally just said, you went into the same thing that I was going to go into. It comes back around to creating your vision. So you can use sex to also create your vision and manifest.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And I think it's something, right? So there's many paths of healing, right? So everybody in the healing world has their own modality that is kind of based on their own pain, right? So if you're dealing with skin, it's because your skin at some point in your life was like the thing that was causing you the most pain. And so there's so many different ways to go in and find your healing. And most of them end up at the same place, right? Of like deep inner work, looking at your shadows, looking at all the places where you feel unworthy, undeserving, all of the places where you're limited. And it's just like, you have to find the place where it feels most aligned for you, where you feel most like, I connect to this. I understand this. I understand that like, this is the thing for me. And you just feel that draw. And I think that's one of the things that we get really disconnected from in this world is our own intuition of what's right for us. And so when you can find those moments of inspiration where you're like, I need to study with this person, I need to be coached by this person, I need this type of healing, follow that, because that is where your intuition is already trying to lead you in the correct direction, right? And I think so often we just think, that's just a silly thought. I don't know. Why would I do that? That's silly. But you could spend your whole life doing that, never actually getting the things that you really need in order to create the life that you truly want.
Yeah, and what you were just saying before is there's many paths. It makes me think of when you put a destination in your phone in your maps app, and there's
Yeah.
4 different ways to get there, and they're all about 10 minutes, maybe one's 12 minutes, but there'll be less traffic or it's a familiar route. So you
Totally.
choose which one resonates with you more, and they're all gonna get you there.
Totally.
So
Totally.
yeah, it doesn't matter like what type of like healing coach or mentor or program, whatever that you choose, you're as long as you're ready and you are invested, you're
Yeah.
going to get the results that you're wanting. And that's what's so beautiful about healing.
Yeah, for sure. And also it's really like resonating with the person, right? So it's so interesting that like people are like, oh, I need to do this and I need to do that. But it's actually most of the transformation that you get is from sitting in front of the other person that has gone and walked on that path before you. And they are teaching you how you move through the world and how you can connect to the energy that you want to connect to and do the kind of deeper healing. But really having a resonance with the person in front of you is going to get you where you want to go, right? So it's so much about being in resonance and like understanding or feeling that draw towards somebody in some modality of healing and really just going after it.
Mhm. There's one other thing that I did want to touch on.
Yep.
Okay, so when it comes to mindset shifts, because it seems like you're very conscious and very selective about the words that you choose.
Sure.
And I notice in your content, you talk about using how can I instead of I can't. And we
Mm.
kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I want to go a little bit deeper. Why? I mean, I can't versus how can I? Like what happens? Like why do we want to do that?
Yeah, for sure. So what I used to notice in the past is that I would know something that I wanted to do. And I'm going to use an example now because it's literally happening for me right now. So for the last 5 years, or probably longer, since I first went to Thailand, I wanted to move to Thailand. I love it. I adopted my dog from there. I've been 3 times. I love to spend as much time as I can there. And I always just said, I would love to live there, but it's not possible. There's no visa. There's no way to live there. I don't have a job that travels. Like I can travel as a DJ, but if I'm doing interior design work, I need to be in Berlin. And so my mindset was always fixed. It was like, I can't have this. It's not practical. It won't work. And what really started happening when I started going in and doing the healing work, changing those limiting beliefs, changing the mindset, was that instead of looking at all of the ways in which it's completely impossible to do the thing I wanted to do, I would start to reorientate and think like, okay, if this is the goal, if I want to live in Thailand, how can I make it happen? Like how am I going to get there? Because it must be possible. Other people do it. There must be ways in which it is possible, right? And I think when you hold that frame, when you hold that mindset of like, there must be a way, And how am I going to get there? You actually start to tap into things like your grit, your determination, your ability to be pulling things out of nowhere and finding connections and finding ways of really prioritizing your dreams, your desires, your wants, your needs. And when you start to do that, it's actually hilarious how the mind or how the world will start falling into place, right? Because all of a sudden, instead of focusing on all the roadblocks, I don't have a job that travels, I don't have this, that, all of these things, you start to go like, okay, but how could it be possible? And then things actually start falling into place because you're so much more open to there being a solution that will present itself. And I think it's actually like, when you buy a car and then you see that car literally everywhere, except my car, because my car is pink. I never see another car like mine. It's so beautiful. But it's that same kind of idea where it's like, when you start kind of opening up to something, you will start to see more of a path in front of you and really start being able to start walking down that path, right? And I really see, since I started holding that frame of like, this is the one I want, how am I going to do it?
Yeah.
Things have just started being more possible, like in the last few years, I've made multiple big investments into coaches, into programs, into moving. And I just make it just starts happening. And I totally get it if you're listening to that and you're like, oh, fuck off. Like, don't just say it just happens. Cause I know people say that and you're like, but it doesn't happen for me, but it doesn't happen. Like, but honestly, it does start happening if you start opening up to the possibility that you can start to have the things you actually want. And I think it is that mindset shift again, right? Where you're like, so many people would like to say, I don't have time. End of conversation. I don't have the money. End of conversation. And that's where they actually get stuck because, again, maybe the pain isn't great enough or the vision is not clear enough. But those ideas of things are not possible for me is where they stop. And so they actually don't end up getting to the place of opening up to the possibility until they're willing to do the work. Pain gets great enough, vision becomes clearer.
Yeah, and our words hold so much power. So when you reinforce those affirmations, you're just putting yourself, you're just stuck in the reality that you're currently in. You're not moving towards that vision, what you want. Yeah.
But also maybe you don't know that, right?
Right.
Because when I was in the past where I was just like, that's impossible, I didn't know that I was the one in the way. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't know that. I believed that it was not possible. And I didn't know that there was another way of like moving through the world where I didn't just like allow that to be the full stop of that sentence, right? And so I think it is about kind of coming back to doing the work on yourself and kind of opening up to those possibilities. It really is important to recognize that often we are the ones that are in our own way. We are standing in our own way because we don't trust in the world. We don't trust in the future. We don't trust that we can do it. We don't trust that we'll be able to find the money again. We don't trust that all of these elements, we don't trust it's okay for us. We don't trust we'll be loved or belong or accepted if we do these things. We're afraid that if we're too big and too powerful, people won't like us. We won't, find a partner, whatever it is. Same thing that even coming back to what you said, you were like, well, if I have 80 boxes, maybe it's too many boxes, and so we start to get in our own way where we're like, maybe I actually can't have the things I want without even questioning, like, where is that thought coming from? So,
Yeah. So this was game changing for me, for my life. If you're talking about self-trust and, self-love and those things. So, and a lot of people will think like, I trust myself, like I love myself. Do you trust your partner? Do you trust your friends? Do you trust that stranger? Do you, if you don't trust the people around you in your life, you do not trust yourself. So that was always a really good reflection for me. Like, how do I feel about them? Because the way that I feel about them or the way that I see them is the way that I actually see myself.
Sure.
And so it's a mirror. Other people are a mirror, and it's a way for you to look at yourself like, whoa, if that's the way I'm feeling about them when they're doing this or whatever, then you need to look at yourself, not them.
Totally. Totally. And I think it's also that, like, do you trust yourself to leave when people don't treat you well? Do you trust yourself to do the work of becoming who you want to be? And it's like, do you also trust yourself? Do you trust the world? Do you trust other people when you're not trying to control them? Like when you're not gripping and making them do it and be a certain way? Like, for example, in my relationship, I didn't trust my partner. I trusted him when I was controlling the shit out of him, when I was like, don't go there, don't come home now. Like, I could kind of trust then, but like, if I let go of control, I thought my whole world would spin out of whack. And, honestly, it might have, because I was not actually trusting anything. I was gripping and trying to make it a certain way and trying to keep it like safe. And, there was actually no trust and there was no safety. And again, both of those things, I didn't know that at the time. I thought that was just kind of normal. I didn't realize that I was giving up my own safety to be in that relationship. And that was a really confronting thing to recognize, that I had made my own safety kind of like an expendable ideal out in the world, where I was like, well, I would like to be safe, but it's not really possible. So I guess I'll just have this relationship where I feel chronically unsafe to the point that I end up in hospital. Like, that's fine, like no problem. And that's one of the things. It's like, we don't recognize that we don't trust ourselves because we actually, we have to control everything, and we don't walk away when we know we need to. We don't actually listen to those intuitive voices because we spend a lot of our time in this world pushing down the voices, numbing, scrolling, being really disconnected from ourselves, because that's a lot more comfortable,
I could talk to you about this stuff literally all day. Is there anything else that you want to share with those listening?
Yeah, I mean, so I have a program, it's called the Essentialist, and it is working with women who have maybe lost their sense of where they are in the world, who they are in the world. And we work through the frame. I love that the sun is coming out for me. We work through the frame of sacred sexuality. So it's working with eroticism as a way of healing and evolving and expanding your ability to create the life that you want, the relationship that you want, the love that you want. And really, it's about anchoring into your self-worth, your deservingness, your self-love, loving your body, really coming back into your body, which is so, so, so important. And so, yeah, that actually begins on August 28th is the next round. And so we're starting very, very soon. So that is me. And you can come and find me on TikTok, Instagram, all of the places at Alaska Wolfe.
Alaska Wolfe. And August 28th, what is the name of the program?
The Essentialist.
The Sensualist. Amazing. And I have one more question. What is your number one health tip? So whether it's mindset, diet and nutrition, physical, emotional, just the one piece of advice that you would like everyone to know.
Oh, wow. The one piece of advice. I think one of the most important things for people to know is to not be afraid of the darkness. Because I think we live in a world where we so much want to stay away from all of the dark parts of ourselves, the parts of ourselves that we've been told are shameful or bad, not acceptable, not lovable. And it is actually by reclaiming those parts that you believe to be so intolerable that you actually get to reclaim the wholeness of your entire being, which is what most people are striving for, right? We just want to feel like we're whole, but most of us are unable to feel whole because there's parts of us that we truly are denying, and we're not willing to go and kind of connect with. And so really not being afraid of those darker parts, not being afraid to go into the darkness and reclaim all of you.
Oh, I love that so much. Thank you for joining me, Alaska. And I will have all of her links and where you can find her in the show notes.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for having me, Jessica. It was lovely.
Absolutely. And thank you for everyone listening.
That concludes this episode. If this resonated with you, please give it a rating and review. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out on Instagram. I would love to hear from you. Links are in the show notes. I sincerely thank you for your time and your presence.